Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly through the folds of time, right between a sigh and a shiver, and land with a thud on a mattress stuffed with horsehair. The curtains around you are velvet, real velvet, the kind that smells like dust, lavender, and centuries of imperial wealth. Someone's knocking. Somewhere, bells are ringing. And you? You've got 26 inches of waist, an aching spine, and roughly 1/4 of the planet expecting you to lead them. You've just woken up as Queen Victoria. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere across the globe, tell me where you are and what time it is. I love knowing who's staying up late with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first thought is confusion. Your second is panic, because you've gone to bed in a t-shirt, maybe with Netflix humming in the background, and woken up in a corset laced tighter than your patience. There's lace everywhere. Your underthings have underthings, and your reflection in the mirror, not yours. She blinks when you blink, but she's not you. Her hair is glossier, her face a little rounder, and somehow weirdly regal. You try to speak, but your voice comes out posher, like a teacup is permanently balanced on your tongue. There's a maid at the door now. "Your Majesty," she says. Oh no, nope, that can't be right. But before you can ask for clarification or a therapist, she's pulled open the curtains. Daylight pours in like judgment. Welcome to June 1837. Outside, London smells like horse sweat, coal, and ambition. The streets are clattering with carriages and possibilities. Inside, your chamber smells faintly of rose water and a hint of mildew. Your new home? Buckingham Palace. Except it isn't quite the version you've seen in glossy documentaries. It's still half-finished, leaky, and a bit cold. You fumble through the day like a time traveler with amnesia. Courtiers bow so low you fear they'll hit the floor. Someone hands you a parchment to sign, and you pray it's not a declaration of war. You're not even sure which country you're in charge of exactly, just that it's a lot. Britain, Ireland, bits of Canada, Australia, something about India. The empire is sprawling like a badly folded map. Historically speaking, you're now the monarch of about 400 million people. Congratulations. You've never even organized a group trip before, and now you're technically in charge of 1/4 of the planet. You're 18 years old, or you're in someone else's 18-year-old body, which might be worse. The original Victoria was sheltered, homeschooled, and absolutely not ready for a job that usually requires several decades of practice. But here you are, learning to curtsy to people who curtsy to you, learning who you're supposed to trust, trying not to cry when someone says the crown must remain impartial, and you're not even sure what they're talking about. Also, everything itches. The dresses, the furniture, the expectations. Even the food is complex. Breakfast involves fish, pudding, and something called kedgeree, which is kind of like rice having an identity crisis. You want toast? Just toast. And then there are the portraits. Dozens of them. You in full regalia. You looking serene. You on a horse. You trying not to blink for 10 hours straight while being painted by a man with opinions about your chin. One fringe tidbit: Victorian portrait painters would sometimes flatter their royal subjects. Just a touch. Historians still argue whether Victoria's portraits truly captured her likeness or just gently airbrushed her into history. But what they can agree on? You were not supposed to wield power, not really. As a young queen, your role was to reign, not rule. Let the men in Parliament handle the tough stuff. You? You were expected to look decorative, remain dignified, and maybe breed some heirs. That's the plan. You're not buying it. So, you start asking questions. You read every report they send your way. You learn which lords are full of hot air and which ministers actually do the work. And you write letters, hundreds of them. The real Victoria did too. She wrote more than 60 million words in her lifetime. That's like the world's longest blog without a comment section. But power comes slowly. For now, you nod and smile. You attend royal balls where your feet go numb by hour 3. You pose for paintings. You try not to shout when someone addresses you as Your Majesty for the 1,000th time. And deep down, you wonder, how long can you keep this up? At night, you collapse into bed, exhausted. Your arms ache from waving. Your brain hurts from pretending to know what Chancellor of the Exchequer means, and your corset may have permanently fused to your ribcage. But there's something else, too, an odd, flickering pride. Because for all the theater and ceremony, you're beginning to sense that maybe, just maybe, you can do this. You close your eyes. Outside, gas lamps hiss. Horses clop in the distance. Somewhere, a servant is folding towels you didn't ask for. And you fall asleep wondering, if you could wake up here of all places, what else might be possible? Morning doesn't so much arrive as ambush you. A knock. A too cheerful, Your Majesty. Then curtains yanked wide and the full fury of the 1837 sun in your face. And you? You're still half dreaming of Spotify playlists and indoor plumbing, but there's no time for nostalgia. Because the moment you sit up, corset already laced, you remember. You're not just in the past, you're in charge. Today begins with a lesson, or more accurately, a fire hose of royal protocol. Someone reads aloud the names of your ministers, dukes, lords, and people you're expected to recognize by eyebrow angle alone. You nod politely while your brain quietly screams. Lord Melbourne is your prime minister, tall, reserved, kind enough, but he talks in code, like politics is a language you should speak, but somehow missed the class. This is your introduction to ruling. Nod, listen, pretend you already know how any of this works. The good news? Everyone else is just as uncomfortable. The court is on edge, the public wary, and the press full of opinions. You're 18, unwed, and untested. A teenage girl holding an empire by its velvet hem. The government wants a puppet. The people want a symbol. And you? You just want tea without making national headlines. You're reminded, gently but often, that while you wear the crown, the real power lies in Parliament. Constitutional monarchy, they say. You smile. But in your mind, you're already finding the cracks in that system. The places where charm, wit, or quiet insistence might shape more than they expect. At breakfast, you practice that charm. You learn how to make small talk with generals and bishops. You smile at ambassadors without showing teeth. You master the art of eating elegantly with gloves on, something no human should ever have to attempt. Historically, Victoria really did step carefully into power. She relied heavily on Lord Melbourne at first. Some said too much. Historians still argue whether he was a guiding mentor or a subtle manipulator. Either way, His influence was massive in your early days. He teaches you the tightrope. Lead enough to be respected, not enough to be feared. Speak often, but never first. In private, you begin to study. Maps of the empire, speeches of past monarchs, letters from your predecessors. You're looking for clues, for strategies, for anything that tells you how to do this without fumbling publicly. One fringe tidbit you stumble upon? George III, your grandfather, once talked to trees during his bouts of madness. Compared to that, your time travel panic attacks feel refreshingly sane. And speaking of sanity, you quickly learn that every room you enter is its own performance. Your walk, your posture, your sighs, they're all read like scripture, so you practice. You study yourself in mirrors. You rehearse smiles like they're military drills. The people watching you now are not your family. They are courtiers, advisors, whisperers, watchers. Every glance you cast is a political move. Every misplaced word becomes gossip by sundown. And yet, amidst all this, you begin to find your rhythm. There's a state banquet, a formal dinner where every fork has a backstory. You wear a tiara that feels more like a punishment than a privilege. You're seated between a French envoy who speaks in riddles and a German duke who laughs like a goose. You survive it somehow. You even make them laugh once. Something about mistaking pheasant for soup. Afterwards, alone in your chambers, you let out a sigh so deep it probably echoes back to the 21st century. You miss sweatpants. You miss iced coffee. You miss the quiet anonymity of being normal. But here's the twist. You're not normal anymore. You read dispatches about Ireland's troubles. You heard rumors from India. You've watched the city below flicker with unrest and potential, and deep down something stirs, a strange kind of curiosity, a flicker of ambition. You begin to write. Letters, reflections, observations. The real Victoria was a prolific writer. Her journals, carefully preserved, reveal a queen both curious and deeply opinionated. You adopt the habit, hoping that writing will steady you, help you find your voice amid the noise, and you do begin to find it. One morning, a servant comments on the fresh flowers you requested for your desk. "No queen has asked for those before," she says, surprised. You smile. Then perhaps it's time one did. Small things, sure, but they matter. The way you speak to your maids, the way you greet the guards, the way you linger with the stable master to ask about the new foal. These aren't royal duties, technically, but they're human ones. And somehow they shift the mood around you, from obligation to connection. You start to notice what others overlook. The soot gathering in the windowsills, the kitchen boy with the limp, the seamstress who doesn't look you in the eye. You begin to understand that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, gentle, observant. There's a moment, mid-week, when a group of Parliament members visit. They bow, as they should, but one of them lingers, watching you carefully. Later, you overhear him mutter, "She's different," and you are, not just because you're from the future, but because you care. You see, you haven't been dulled by years of protocol. You're raw, curious, unafraid to ask the questions no one else does. And that might be your greatest advantage. Still, it's not easy. There's loneliness here. The halls echo more than they should. The weight of the crown lingers even after you take it off. You dream strange dreams, of trains, of ships, of countries you've never seen but somehow now belong to you. You start to understand the burden Victoria carried, to be a symbol, a sovereign, and still somehow a person. And maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to figure out how to do it too. You first meet him in a drawing room so polished you can see your future unraveling in the floorboards. He stands straight, gloved hands clasped behind his back, posture impossibly proper, like he was born already a mid-curtsy. His hair is neat, his collar stiff, and his face, well, it's the kind that belongs on a commemorative coin. That's Prince Albert, your cousin, your destiny, your very complicated +1 for life. He bows low, but not too low. You catch a flicker of curiosity behind his eyes, and maybe judgment. Definitely judgment. That raised brow, it says, do you know how to govern a constitutional monarchy, or are you winging it like the rest of us? You don't say anything. You just breathe slowly, like you practiced, and smile in a way that says, I can hold this empire and this awkward silence. Albert is intelligent, brilliant, really. He speaks several languages, has thoughts about urban sanitation, and collects mechanical models like a Victorian version of a Lego obsessive. The real Victoria was instantly smitten. You, however, are intrigued. He's not flirtatious, not particularly warm, but there's something magnetic about a man who could recite the German Constitution and still notice your shoes are the wrong shade of ivory. Your advisors are already whispering, marriage, they say, political stability, royal continuity, blah, blah, crown and country. You haven't even gotten through your first month of monarchy, and they're already picking china patterns for the wedding. Albert, for his part, is calm, thoughtful. He watches, he waits. He doesn't chase the room. He grounds it. And while you're still adjusting to corsets and court politics, he's here asking about population density in Manchester. There's a luncheon where he's seated to your left, and he leans over just once to quietly correct your pronunciation of charade. You could be offended, but the way he does it, it's soft, like he's handing you a glove you dropped. After that, you find yourself listening when he speaks. But he's not all logic and ledgers. One evening, you catch him at the piano, his fingers making music out of melancholy. You stand in the doorway and realize he feels just as caged by duty as you do. Historically, Victoria did propose to Albert. Royal protocol dictated that because she was queen, she had to be the one to ask. That flips a lot of fairy tales upside down. Historians still argue whether she truly loved him more than he loved her, or if their partnership was simply necessity refined into affection. What's clear? She admired him deeply, trusted him, and occasionally wanted to wring his neck when he got too bossy. In your version of events, the proposal is less a swoon and more of a strategic truce. You sit across from him in a parlor filled with the scent of fresh ink and coal smoke and say, quietly, evenly, would you stand beside me? He doesn't smile, not exactly, but he nods once, and it's enough. From there, life becomes a duet, not always harmonious, but undeniably tied. Albert begins to advise. Not in public, he's careful not to overshadow you, but in private, his influence grows. He cares about reforms, technology, the moral backbone of the empire. He's got opinions on chimney sweeps and sewage systems, and to his credit, he always listens to yours. He challenges you, politely, persistently, He asks questions like, "Do you think that's wise?" And "What message does this send?" And sometimes, "Are you sure that's what you want?" He doesn't flatter. He grounds you. You argue. A lot. Mostly about responsibility, about how to modernize without upsetting the aristocracy, about whether your role is to preserve or to change. You're fiery, he's methodical. You want action, he wants planning. But it works, because under the crown, you're still human, and marriage, even royal marriage, is built on learning to argue kindly. One fringe tidbit: Albert was a big fan of moral improvement. He even suggested banning alcohol at palace events. You imagine gently suggesting that to modern guests at a royal wedding, and feel a ripple of sympathy for the palace staff. Still, Albert isn't just your partner. He's your mirror. The way he holds your gaze when you're uncertain reminds you you're not imagining the weight of all this. It is heavy, and it's okay to say so. He brings structure to your chaos. He designs nurseries when the children come, 9 of them, historically. You've never filled out so many royal birth announcements in your life. He obsesses over education. He builds, he draws, he organizes the great exhibition, a sprawling display of innovation from across the empire. He loves order, and you, reluctantly, love what that order brings. There are moments, of course, when he overreaches, when he drafts letters in your name or accidentally speaks over you in council meetings. You remind him, gently but firmly, that you are queen, that the crown rests on your head, and he steps back. Usually. But there's warmth, too. You take long walks in Windsor's gardens. You exchange quiet jokes during ceremonies. You learn to speak with just a glance across the ballroom. He calls you dearest, and somehow it never feels performative. In the public eye, you're a symbol of domestic virtue. 2 young monarchs raising children, reading newspapers, pretending to be normal while living in a palace. The people love it. It's comforting, stable. A monarch with a moral compass and a visible heart. Behind closed doors, it's more complicated. He misses Germany. You crave solitude. He's precise. You're impulsive. But the love is real, grounded. A kind of love built on respect, resilience, and shared burdens. And maybe that's what surprises you most. You always imagined royalty as glitter and fanfare, but now, at the heart of it, it's this: quiet mornings with matching teacups, frustrated scribbles over policy drafts, a warm hand at your back during long ceremonies, a partner who sees through the pageantry and reminds you, gently, always, that you are still you, even when history tries to make you something else. The morning begins the way it always does now: lace, buttons, quiet knocks. But this time, your corset seems to groan in anticipation, because your body feels different, heavier, slower. You sit at the dressing table squinting at your reflection. There's a softness around your jaw that wasn't there before. Or maybe it's just your imagination. It isn't. The palace physician confirms it with a cough and a flushed face. "Congratulations, Your Majesty," he says. "You're expecting." Expecting what, exactly, you want to ask? Because this isn't just any pregnancy. This is a royal heir, and you're no modern mother-to-be with an app tracking fetal kicks. You're in the 1840s now, sweetheart, and childbirth is basically high-stakes roulette. Good luck. Queen Victoria had 9 children. 9. And you're barely ready to raise a houseplant. The baby news sends shock waves through the palace. Cribs are ordered, maids reassigned. The ladies in waiting start hovering like anxious doves. And Albert? He handles it like he handles everything else, with spreadsheets and good posture. He writes a child-rearing manual within a week. You're not even exaggerating. To be fair, he is excited, but he's also controlling. He wants the nursery a certain way. He wants the governess to speak fluent German. He wants a schedule. And you're trying to sleep through the nausea. Here's the kicker. Queen Victoria famously hated being pregnant. She described it as an occupation she loathed. She found the process uncomfortable, exhausting, and undignified. And honestly, you get it. You try to attend cabinet meetings, but the baby kicks like a rebellious backbencher. You try to write letters, but your hands swell. At one point, you misspell your own name, and the worst part, no one tells you the truth. They just smile politely and say, "Glowing, Your Majesty," while you waddle like a ship in stormy waters. When the baby comes, after hours of pain, you're absolutely not going to glamorize. It's a blur of screams, linen, and candlelight. And then, silence, a cry, a boy, the future King Edward VII. You don't feel immediate joy. You feel relief, like you just survived a duel with time itself. Albert is there, of course, beaming. But you mostly want toast and to sleep for a week. What comes next is harder, because you're not allowed to just be a mother. You're still a queen. The court doesn't pause for your postpartum fog. Ministers still need your seal. Ambassadors still want audiences. The empire still churns, demanding decisions you're too tired to make. So you compartmentalize. You divide your time between feeding, ruling, and the occasional attempt at bathing. There's no Netflix, no DoorDash, no Instagram scroll to numb your brain at 3 a.m., just candlelight and the creak of the rocking chair. And once you find your rhythm, just barely, you're pregnant again, then again, and again. Historically, Victoria's pregnancies spanned 2 decades. And while she loved her children in theory, she wasn't exactly a doting parent. She called infants frog-like. She feared childbirth, and she really hated breastfeeding. "The whole thing is revolting," she wrote once. Historians still argue whether her views were the product of trauma, temperament, or the weight of being forced into a role she didn't choose. Albert, by contrast, adored the children. He supervised their schedules. He designed their educational plans. He even gave moral lectures. Imagine Mr. Rogers with a monocle and a Bavarian accent. You, meanwhile, become the reluctant glue. You appear at public events with carefully chosen children in tow. You pose for portraits that scream, "Happy family," while gritting your teeth through teething. There's one day, in particular, that sticks with you. You're in a receiving line, shaking hands with dignitaries, when your son bolts from the nursery and face plants into a visiting Dutch ambassador. The silence that follows is biblical. You murmur something queenly, but inside, you're screaming. This is motherhood, Victorian style. High stakes, low sleep, and very expensive carpets covered in mashed turnip. And yet, there are moments, tiny golden flashes between the exhaustion and the duty. Your daughter curls up beside you during a thunderstorm. One of the boys gives you a crooked drawing of Mama and her big crown. You overhear them practicing your full title in the hallway, Her Majesty Queen Victoria, by the grace of God, and then dissolving into giggles. Those moments are rare, but they're real, and they keep you going. One fringe tidbit, Victoria and Albert's children called them Mama and Papa in letters which might sound sweet, but the tone was often formal, even stilted. Family life in the palace was more structured than snuggly. You live that now. Hugs are rare. Nannies outnumber bedtime stories. But you sneak in softness where you can. Still, the pressure never lifts. Every decision you make, every outfit, every outing, is scrutinized. Your motherhood is political. Your womb is national infrastructure. Even your absences from public life are interpreted as weakness. So you do what queens have always done. Endure. You build a system. Mornings are for governance, afternoons for children, evenings for appearances. You start marking crying in the linen closet on the calendar like it's just another recurring meeting. You find comfort in small rebellions, canceling an unnecessary ball, sneaking chocolate from the kitchens, refusing to wear that one hideous brooch again. And through it all, Albert hovers. Supportive, demanding, devoted. He's the architect of your private world, and sometimes you want to kiss him for it. Other times, you want to shout, "I was a whole person before you started organizing my diary." But this is the life now. Queen, wife, mother. A triangle with very little room in the middle. And still, you manage to carve out a sliver of self. You write. You walk alone in the gardens. You keep a box under your bed with tiny, non-regal things. A dried leaf from your first walk as queen. A ribbon from your daughter's hair. A note Albert once passed you during a meeting that just says, "You're doing fine." It's not perfect. It's not easy. But you're still here. The morning feels different, heavier somehow. The air carries the weight of unspoken dread. You wake not to the rustle of silk or the clang of breakfast trays, but to silence. Dense, watchful silence. Albert isn't there. At first, you think he's simply off organizing something, probably alphabetizing military reports or redrawing the children's chore charts. But as the hours pass, that familiar dread tightens its grip. When he finally returns, pale, eyes shadowed, it isn't with a stack of papers, it's with a cough. A deep, rattling cough that echoes too long in the corridor. You don't panic. Not outwardly. Queens don't panic. But deep down, you know something's wrong. You know this isn't just a chill or a winter bug. You sit by his bedside while the doctors whisper in Latin. He waves you off with a weak smile, ever the stoic prince. He says, "It's nothing." He says, "It will pass." It doesn't. Prince Albert died at age 42. Possibly from typhoid fever, though historians still argue whether it was that, Crohn's disease, or sheer exhaustion. Whatever it was, it steals him from you slowly. Too slowly to be merciful, too quickly to prepare. One morning, you take his hand, and it's cold, and everything inside you collapses. In that moment, you don't feel like a monarch or a mother or even a person. You feel like a shadow trying to cling to something already fading. You don't cry, not at first. You sit motionless for hours, staring at the fireplace, wondering if time can be undone. It can't. So you mourn, visibly, obsessively, completely. You wear black. Not just for the funeral, not just for the week. For years. Eventually, for the rest of your life. Every ribbon, every glove, every thread, mourning black. You change the court dress code. You order statues, memorials, gardens dedicated to Albert's memory. You speak of him like he's just stepped out of the room. The public takes notice. At first, They understand. They grieve with you. But as weeks become months, and months stretch into years, sympathy twists into confusion, then frustration. The Queen has vanished. You stop attending public events. You cancel balls, delay banquets, refuse to be seen. Your face disappears from newspapers. The people begin to whisper, "Is she broken, mad, dead?" You're not. You're grieving. But grief this large becomes its own kind of empire, and you are its sovereign. One fringe detail, you even had Albert's shaving set and night clothes laid out each day, as though he might return at any moment. The palace staff obeyed without comment. What else could they do? But inside your grief, something odd happens. You begin to simplify. You no longer care about court gossip. You ignore fashion trends. You walk through your homes like a ghost, but you observe. You see the wear on the carpets, the cracks in the walls, the quiet struggles of the people around you. Albert's absence forces you to see everything. You retreat often to Balmoral, your Scottish estate, where the air is sharp and honest. The trees there don't care about etiquette. The rocks don't curtsy. And for a few precious hours, you breathe. Still, the country cannot function on nostalgia. Ministers grow restless. The press turns sour. A queen who vanishes creates a power vacuum, and power never stays empty for long. Eventually, under pressure, you reappear. Slowly, a public statement, a carriage ride, a reluctant wave from a balcony. You feel exposed, like skin newly healed. But the people respond. Cheers echo. Flags wave. You're still their queen, and they've missed you. But you're never quite the same. Albert was not just your husband. He was your compass, your planner, your mirror. Without him, everything feels slightly off-kilter. You still govern. You still sign documents and advise ministers. But the joy, the sparkle behind the duty, flickered out the day he left. You try to fill the void. You turn to your children, though they're grown now. Some are overseas. Some are married to distant cousins you don't entirely trust. They write. They visit. But none of them see you the way Albert did. And so, you talk to him anyway. In your journals, your letters, your thoughts. You write to him about world affairs, about the latest inventions, about your stubborn headaches. Your grief becomes a kind of conversation. You narrate your life to a man who can no longer answer. And that helps. In time, the public warms again. Your mourning becomes part of your myth. The queen in black. The widow, monarch. A figure of solemn strength in an age of excess. They project their own sorrows onto yours and find comfort in your consistency. But behind closed doors, it's more delicate. Some days you can speak of him without tears. Others, the smell of ink or the creak of his old chair crumbles you. You keep a lock of his hair in a locket. You carry his portrait in your handbag. His name is still on your tongue when you fall asleep. You're not stuck in the past. You're rooted in it. And slowly, that root becomes your anchor. Because grief, real grief, is not a storm. It's a tide. It pulls. It drifts. It returns. And over time, you learn to float. By now, your staff has adjusted. They work in quieter tones. The palace has a rhythm again, a gentler one. Your ministers know how to navigate your moods. The public nods when they see you in black. It's not odd anymore. It's you. One day, you overhear two visitors in the garden. One points toward the palace window and says, "That's the queen, isn't it?" The other replies, "Yes, she loved deeply." And somehow that feels more important than all your titles. Because you didn't just rule, you felt. You grieved so loudly the world had to pause and listen, and now perhaps you're ready to speak again. The seasons turn, but the world doesn't wait. Parliament still debates. Colonies still expand. And your ministers still knock timidly, wondering if today's the day you'll engage or retreat. You're back, yes, but not the same. Grief doesn't vanish. It weaves itself into your every movement. And then comes him, John Brown. He's not royal, not refined, certainly not what the court expects. He's a Scottish Highlander with hands like tree bark and a glare that could peel wallpaper. Technically, he's a servant, one of many assigned to Balmoral Castle, but quickly, very quickly, he becomes something else. At first, it's small. He brings your horse without being asked, stands too close, speaks plainly, doesn't bow. At one point, he actually calls you woman, not your majesty. You nearly choke on your tea, but it's refreshing. Everyone else treads so carefully around your sorrow, it's like living in a museum. Brown doesn't tiptoe. He talks to you like you're human, like you're not breakable. And it's nice. Soon, he's accompanying you everywhere. Walks, rides, trips between castles. He watches you, but not in the way your ministers do. Not for weakness or opportunity, just presence. Like he's guarding something fragile and fierce at once. The palace staff start to murmur. Brown's seen entering your private quarters. He speaks to you with alarming familiarity. He calls you woman in that thick brogue, and instead of firing him, you laugh. That laughter sets off 1,000 rumors. Historians still argue whether anything romantic happened between Queen Victoria and John Brown. No official record confirms it, but the signs were everywhere. The closeness, the trust, the quiet defiance of expectations. You're not sure what to call it. There's no modern label for it. Not quite lover, not quite servant. Companion, maybe. Confidant. The man who sees through the veil of black crape and court rituals to the heart beneath. He's also deeply annoying. He bosses your guards around. He criticizes your staff. He once scolded a visiting noble for offering you his arm too aggressively. You had to apologize, which made him scowl harder. But you also didn't mind that he did it. John Brown becomes a part of your rhythm. He brings you letters, brushes your horse, waits at the door with that gruff expression that somehow says, "You're not alone." One fringe detail, after Brown's death, you commissioned a statue of him, full-sized, positioned prominently on palace grounds. This did not go over well with your children, especially the future Edward VII, who reportedly hated the man. But you didn't care, because here's the truth. Grief reshapes your needs. Albert was your anchor. Brown is your tether. You don't love them the same way, but both brought you back from the edge. Still, the scandal simmers. Court whispers are relentless, improper, unbecoming. Beneath her, you hear it all. You ignore most of it, but occasionally it stings, because you're not blind. You know how this looks? A widowed queen spending time alone with a gruff commoner in a remote Scottish castle. Sounds like a serialized novel. You consider dismissing him. You come close. Once, after a particularly vicious article, you even begin to draft a letter. but you crumple it. You look out the window, and there he is, Brown, holding your dog, shaking his head at the weather, waiting. So, you don't. Instead, you embrace it, quietly, fully. You let yourself be not the queen, not the widow, but something simpler. Just a woman who found someone who made silence less heavy. Still, you compartmentalize. When you're in London, you play the part. Regal, untouchable, perfectly composed. You attend functions, give speeches, smile at diplomats. But when you retreat to Balmoral, you exhale. You ride through wild moors. You drink whiskey in mugs without handles. You sit by the fire and argue with Brown about whether you need a blanket, and there's peace in that. The oddest part? The world keeps turning just fine. The ministers survive without your constant presence. The empire doesn't collapse. The people still cheer. Turns out the crown is heavier in your head than it is in reality. But your absence, your emotional absence, is noticed. Disraeli, your prime minister now, is nothing like Melbourne or Peel. He's witty, dramatic. He calls you fairy queen and quotes poetry in cabinet meetings. He's the only man in government who dares flatter you, and you like it more than you should. He doesn't mock Brown, but he watches him with curiosity. Disraeli knows power when he sees it, even if it wears muddy boots. And power is what Brown represents. Your power to choose, to grieve, to heal on your own terms. You're no longer the girl queen from 1837. You've passed through fire, and now you wear your silence like armor. Still, time never waits. Brown grows older, slower. He coughs more. And then one winter, he's gone. Quietly, no fanfare, just absence. You are shattered again, but differently this time. Less like a collapse, more like a dimming. You mourn him privately, fiercely. You keep his belongings. You commission paintings. You refuse to erase him, no matter how many advisors suggest you should. And in that choice, you reclaim something. Because history, you realize, isn't just written in wars and treaties. It's written in love, in loss, in the quiet courage of saying, this mattered, and I will not pretend it didn't. So, you keep going, not because you've healed, but because you've accepted the ache. And because, somewhere out there, beyond the gas lamps and carriages and politics, there's still work to do. You walk differently now, slower, steadier. Every footstep echoes not just through the marble halls, but through years of memory. Brown is gone. The warmth he brought, that curious comfort of being seen without fanfare, has faded into the soft silence of grief. But the world, it refuses to pause. Your ministers knock again. Letters stack on your desk. The empire calls, and you, ever the reluctant constant, respond. Bit by bit, your schedule returns. You ride less, you smile less, but you rule with a clarity that surprises even you. Then one day, Benjamin Disraeli returns with a grin and a twinkle in his eye, bearing news, suggestions, and, of course, poetry. He recites verses like he's auditioning for a courtier-themed opera, and you pretend not to enjoy it. But you do. He calls you Fairy Queen, and while it sounds ridiculous on paper, from him it feels almost sacred. You miss warmth, you miss connection, and Disraeli offers something rare, respect without deference. He flatters not your crown, but your mind. You welcome him in ways you never did with previous ministers. He dares to laugh with you. He tells you your opinions matter, And that's intoxicating, because most men, especially in Parliament, act like you're porcelain or a portrait come to life. Disraeli treats you like a partner in mischief. You trade letters filled with literary quotes and sly commentary. You feel sharp again, alive. His wit pulls you back into the present. You disagree often, especially on policy. But when you do, he listens. And when he wins, he doesn't gloat. You'd never admit it publicly, but you look forward to his visits more than you should. One day, he says, "Your Majesty, if I were not Prime Minister, I'd be your poet." And you don't reply. You just smile into your teacup and let the air carry that sentence into the folds of history. It's not love, not like Albert, not comfort, not like Brown, but it's connection, a rare intellectual electricity. And in your twilight years, that's something precious. One mainstream historical fact: Disraeli and Victoria had one of the most affectionate monarch-minister relationships in British history. She adored his charisma. He admired her resolve. They exchanged gifts, poems, and long handwritten notes. His political rival, Gladstone, had none of that charm. You find him exhausting. You try, truly, but every time Gladstone visits, it feels like an exam. He lectures, he moralizes. He says "madam" like it's a legal term. You sit still, you nod, but inside, you're screaming. After he leaves, you circle "never again" 3 times in your diary. It becomes a bit of a court joke. Disraeli brings flowers. Gladstone brings graphs. One makes you feel like a queen, the other like a bureaucratic filing cabinet. But you understand their roles. You work with both, because you have to. The older you get, the more you see politics not as a battlefield, but as a dance. Timing, tone, subtle shifts, and you've learned the steps. You begin to assert more. You're no longer content to reign passively. You write letters to Parliament, to colonies, to foreign heads of state. You keep up with reforms, sometimes reluctantly, but always with attention. Education, sanitation, housing. You don't initiate every change, but you understand their ripples. And you never forget the power of appearances. One day, your advisors suggest a visit, public, grand, symbolic. You hesitate. You're not the young queen anymore. You walk slower. Your face is lined with grief and time. But you agree. You step out onto a platform in Liverpool. Thousands cheer. Union Jacks flap like applause. Children climb lampposts to glimpse you. You wave just once, and the noise becomes thunder. They haven't forgotten you. You're still theirs, and that changes something in you. You begin appearing more, not out of duty, but connection. You see their faces, hear their voices. You realize the crown isn't just a burden, it's a bridge between classes, between centuries, between your life and theirs. One fringe detail: you begin to collect mementos from public visits, scraps of fabric, pressed flowers, tiny gifts. You keep them in a drawer, not for cataloging, just for memory. And through it all, you write. Your journals are sprawling now, millions of words tracing your life like fingerprints in ink. Historians will argue over them for centuries. Some will call them self-important, others deeply human, but none will doubt their value. Because in those pages, you're not just the queen, you're you, with messy thoughts and private longings and the need, so desperately human, to be known. Even now, people talk about your distance, your stiffness, your endless mourning, but they don't know the whole of you. The nights you walked your halls barefoot, the letters you wrote and never sent, the way your hand trembled when you first signed Victoria R. after Albert's death. You've lost so much, but you're still here, ruling, evolving, and quietly, stubbornly, feeling. Because even when they say queens aren't supposed to feel, you do. Every single day. It starts with a crown, but it ends with a word. Empress. You don't expect it. One moment, you're sipping tea, listening to Disraeli ramble about parliamentary reforms in that charming, self-important way of his, and the next, he's looking at you like he's about to drop something scandalous. Your Majesty, he says with a glint in his eye, how would you feel about becoming Empress of India? You nearly choke on your biscuit. India, the jewel in the British crown, the colony that fuels half your empire's pride and most of its controversy. You've never been there, likely never will. But suddenly, you're being offered an entirely new title, one soaked in symbolism, power, and more than a little politics. And you say yes, because even if you're not entirely sure what it means, it feels right. You're older now, stoic, a little mythic. Queen suits the beginning of your story, but Empress? That's the tone for your finale. So they crown you again, figuratively this time. There's no new coronation, just proclamations, parades, and portraits with a few extra silk ribbons. You become Victoria, by the grace of God, Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, and Empress of India. It's a mouthful, and you make your secretaries write it out, not you. Still, it changes how people see you. No longer just Britain's monarch, you're now a living symbol of empire, a human bridge between London and Lahore, Buckingham and Bombay. You begin receiving gifts, saris, spices, intricate carvings, elephants carved from ivory, whole crates of mangoes. Some are beautiful, some are baffling. You admire them all, but there's tension too. You can feel it, because behind every jeweled necklace and ceremonial sword, there's a shadow. Colonization. The empire thrives, yes, but not without cost. Cultures are rewritten, borders redrawn, lives displaced. Historians still argue whether your reign's expansion of empire was noble progress or oppressive overreach. You know what the paintings say. Dignified soldiers, grateful natives, radiant Britannia holding the globe. But you also know the letters they don't frame, the rebellions, the famines, the resentment. And sometimes, in the quiet of your chambers, you wonder, are you a unifier or a conqueror? Your advisors assure you it's honor, that your name brings stability, that the empire is better under your watch. And maybe they're right, but the unease lingers, tucked between the silks and scrolls. You try to learn more. You read reports, ask questions, study customs. One fringe tidbit, you begin learning Hindustani, just a little, enough to exchange greetings, to sign Victoria Empress in a script you don't fully understand. It's a gesture, small but sincere. You also bring Indian servants into the royal household. Abdul Karim becomes your favorite, young, loyal, and honest in a way others aren't. He teaches you more Hindustani. He tells you stories from Agra. He writes letters for you when your hands ache. The court is scandalized. A commoner, they whisper, an Indian man so close to the queen. But you ignore them, because Abdul doesn't treat you like a monument. He brings you mangoes and asks about your headaches. He reminds you you're still human. He's not another John Brown. It's different, but it matters. Of course, time makes everything complicated. Your children dislike him. Your advisors grow suspicious. They rummage through his belongings. They accuse him of overstepping. They urge you to send him away. You don't. Because there's something profoundly lonely about ruling an empire, something no ball or banquet can fix. And in Abdul's presence, you feel less alone. Still, you're careful. You keep certain letters private. You limit his influence. You remember what happened with Brown. You don't want another statue scandal. Yet the bond remains. A reminder that even in your later years, connection is possible. That empire doesn't always have to mean distance. You visit Osborne House and decorate it with Indian motifs. You have curry served at state dinners. You walk through English gardens while thinking of jasmine and monsoons. You imagine a place you'll never see, yet somehow feel tied to. And this is the paradox of your title. You are empress of a land you've never touched, revered by people you've never met, loved by some, resented by others. You are a name etched into a history far too vast to grasp. And yet, they still write to you. Villagers, school children, officials, petitioners. Their letters are folded in nervous hands, scented with ink and hope. You read as many as you can. Sometimes you respond. Because even if the empire is imperfect, even if you are imperfect, there's still value in being seen. So you write. You ask for better roads, for schools, for sanitation. You push your ministers gently but firmly. You insist on reforms even if they take years. You cannot fix everything, but you try. And in trying, you find purpose again. The empire remains complicated, heavy, beautiful and brutal in equal parts. But now, when you sign your name, you feel the weight of it, not just the crown, the connection. You are Victoria, Queen, Empress, a woman at the center of a world too large to hold and too precious to ignore. It begins with a candlelit mirror. You're staring at yourself, really staring, for the first time in weeks. The skin beneath your eyes folds a little deeper. Your collarbones look more like punctuation marks than decoration now. You adjust the velvet wrap around your shoulders and catch a glimpse of something unexpected. You're aging, not just poetically, not like a line from one of Disraeli's flowery speeches. Actually, wrinkles, aching joints, the unmistakable creak of a knee that once knelt gracefully and now resents stares with a fiery vengeance. Time, it seems, hasn't forgotten you. Your court still tries to flatter. Radiant, they say. Glowing, they chirp, as if you've been blessed by candlelight instead of facing a 70-something birthday with all your original teeth and none of your original tolerance for nonsense. But the mirror doesn't lie. So, when the idea of a jubilee first surfaces, your golden jubilee no less, you're skeptical. 50 years on the throne, a celebration that massive sounds exhausting. What would we even celebrate, you ask, half joking? That I've survived my own government? Your staff chuckles politely, but the country answers for you. Bells ring, streets fill, children wear paper crowns, entire villages send hand-stitched banners, even colonies send gifts, carved totems from Canada, golden brooches from Australia, elaborately woven tapestries from India. Suddenly, you realize something quietly profound. To them, you are the story. You are the backdrop of their lives. So you agree to the Jubilee. And it is overwhelming. The carriages creak with garlands. The horses wear silks. The people line the streets, calling your name like you're both legend and grandmother. You wave from your carriage dressed in black, as always, a glinting crown nestled among white lace. There are cheers, choruses, confetti made of paper, and good intentions. For a moment, it feels like the past 50 years have collapsed into this one golden afternoon. One mainstream historical fact: the Golden Jubilee in 1887 was one of the largest public celebrations Britain had ever seen. It marked not just your reign, but the endurance of a monarchy that had, frankly, looked shaky back in 1837. You'd become something rare, not just a ruler, but a fixture. And with that fixture status comes the next surprise. You don't dread public appearances anymore. You're still not fond of speeches or sitting through operas so long they might outlive the actual composer. But you appreciate the connection, the faces, the aging veterans who salute with tears in their eyes, the girls who clutch sketchbooks instead of dolls, the shopkeepers who've named cats and boats and children after you. There's even a pub called the Quiet Queen. You're not sure whether to feel honored or deeply roasted. Back at the palace, the aftermath of the Jubilee feels like stepping out of a dream. Gifts overflow in corridors. Letters pile like snowdrifts. You spend hours reading them because you want to. Because it turns out, even after half a century, you still crave one thing: to be understood. And that's why, when the idea of a Diamond Jubilee is mentioned years later, you don't hesitate. 60 years on the throne, more than 2/3 of your life spent wearing a crown. You've lived through cholera outbreaks, railway explosions, assassination attempts, telegrams, revolutions, and the invention of the flush toilet, which, frankly, deserves its own parade. One fringe tidbit: you're known to have a fondness for your personal commode, specially designed for your long travels. Your staff refers to it with both reverence and fear. It's the only seat in the empire that rivals your throne in importance. The Diamond Jubilee in 1897 becomes even grander than the last. It's not just a celebration, it's a reckoning. You ride in a carriage of glass through London's heart while thousands chant your name. Ships honk in the harbor. Fireworks bloom like colonial metaphors in the night sky. You wave, you smile. You squint at the distant faces and wonder how many remember the young girl who once feared falling off this throne. And yet, it's not all joy. You're slower now. Fatigue lingers longer. Sometimes you forget names, misplace glasses, wonder what day it is. You write letters and then rewrite them, embarrassed by the wobble in your script. You find yourself staring out windows more, thinking not of policy or legacy, but of silence and dreams, because these days your dreams feel like rewinds. Albert, smiling at a nursery door. Brown, grunting at a tangled saddle strap. Disraeli, reciting a sonnet too dramatically for the occasion. Even your younger self, frowning at a map, trying to understand the impossible puzzle of ruling half the world before breakfast. You're not just older, you're layered. Memory upon memory, pressed together like letters tucked in drawers. The world still spins, but you feel it in your bones now. And still you wave. You ride through crowds. You carry the title not like a weapon, but like a lantern, lighting the path for a world that's already shifting beyond you. Because that's the thing no one tells you. Being queen doesn't mean controlling time. It means watching it reshape everything, even you, and learning how to hold still in the center of it all. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real crown. By now your ankles swell if you sit too long. The buttons on your gloves seem smaller, or maybe your fingers are just stiffer. Either way, you ladies-in-wait and start doing more of the dressing these days, less out of duty, more out of mercy. And still, the world insists on throwing parties. Today is another one. A royal ball in your honor, complete with fireworks, imported crystal, and an orchestra so large it needs 2 conductors and a footman to pass notes between them. You smile, you wave, and you think, I've done this before, 100 times, 1,000, but something's changed. The faces have aged. Some are missing, some are new, and they look at you not like a ruler, but like a relic. There's reverence in their eyes, but also a quiet curiosity, as if they're wondering how long the story can really go on. You sip from a tiny glass of sherry. You nod at a German cousin who's married a Russian cousin and produced a child with more titles than hair. Your family tree has become less of a tree and more of a diplomatic strategy chart. You don't even try to remember which child married whom anymore. You just say, darling, and hope it lands. Historically, your descendants do end up ruling half of Europe, or at least marrying into it. Your daughter becomes the German Empress. Your grandson becomes Kaiser Wilhelm II. Your great-granddaughter will someday become Queen Elizabeth's mother. The web you've woven is so intricate that it practically wraps around the globe, which makes family dinners complicated. You recall a wedding, one of the recent ones. Grand halls, gold drapery, everyone perfumed within an inch of their lives. You'd smiled through it all, but somewhere between the toasts and the waltzing, you'd leaned over to your eldest daughter and whispered, do any of them actually like each other? She just laughed and asked where the punch was. Because here's the quiet truth behind all these royal unions. They aren't about love. They're about stability, power, peace through bloodlines, and you've played matchmaker more times than you can count. Your diary once contained detailed notes about potential suitors for your children. You rated them: status, religion, personality, potential for scandal. You basically invented The Bachelor, but with crowns. And yet you did care. You wanted your daughters to marry well, yes, but also to be safe, to be seen. You pushed for matches that would protect them, even if it meant sending them far away. Some thanked you, some didn't. One never wrote again. You remember the quiet goodbye of your daughter Alice, gentle, sickly Alice, who died young, her own children devastated. You remember the rage when your son Bertie made headlines for all the wrong reasons. You remember the pride when your granddaughter Victoria ascended as German Empress. Then the anxiety as war clouds gathered. Historians still argue whether your matchmaking prevented wars or laid the groundwork for one big, ugly one. And you? You sit by the window in your drawing room and think, I tried. Not just to rule, but to hold. The family, the empire, the narrative. You tried to stretch your love across borders, across language, across egos and scandals, and the brutal arithmetic of monarchy. But love, even royal love, doesn't always travel well. One fringe tidbit. You once had so many royal family members staying at Windsor that the kitchens nearly ran out of eggs. A butler panicked. A footman fainted. The solution was to ration breakfast, starting with the Belgian prince who kept sending food back anyway. Still, despite the chaos, you feel something settling, You know the chessboard by heart now. You can see moves before they're made. A revolution here, a diplomatic marriage there, a scandal brewing just beneath the lace of some duchess's hemline. You aren't surprised anymore, but you are still moved, especially when the commoners line the roads during processions, when old women wave handkerchiefs, when little girls squeal at the sight of your carriage. You used to feel distant from them, untouchable. Now, you see their lives, their effort, their faith in something bigger than themselves. You've become part of their landscape, a landmark, a lighthouse, which is why, when you attend a final state dinner in your late 70s, joints aching, smile slightly uneven, you still sit tall. You still wear the sash. You still raise your glass with that practiced flick of the wrist because it matters. To them, to history, maybe even to you. And as you drift back to your room, shoes pinching slightly, crown feeling heavier than usual, you murmur to your lady's maid, "Remind me tomorrow, no speeches, no balls, just a quiet breakfast." She nods. "Of course, Your Majesty." You know she's lying. There's always something. But you smile anyway, because you've learned the trick now. You don't have to enjoy every moment. You just have to carry it. And you do. Your breakfast is late this morning, scandalous by palace standards. By the time your maid pours the tea, the sun has shifted across the tapestry in your private sitting room, lighting up threads of gold you forgot were even there. You're not in a hurry. That, perhaps, is the biggest luxury of all. The post arrives in stacks, some official, some deeply not. Letters from ministers, requests from charities, invitations to unveil yet another statue of yourself. You skim the first few pages, then pause when you see the handwriting. It's from one of your grandchildren. You squint at the sloping script, make out the words wedding, Vienna, and you'd absolutely hate her tiara. You chuckle. The future of European diplomacy, penned in casual sarcasm and ink blots. You've become the matriarch of monarchs. Your children married into almost every royal house in Europe. Your grandchildren now rule, or will rule, across the continent. Some you know well. Affectionate, thoughtful, occasionally exasperating. Others are more like titles with eyebrows. Formal, distant, too polite to ever really be themselves in your presence. But you still try. You keep a chart now, an actual, illustrated chart, tracking who married whom, which duchy is allied with which kingdom, which cousin is newly widowed or inconveniently in love. It's more complicated than your cabinet briefings, at least with Parliament. People eventually agree to vote. Not so with your family. There's always another negotiation, another engagement to approve, another scandal to manage. Sometimes you think, if one more distant cousin elopes with a ballet dancer, you'll retire to the Isle of Wight and raise ducks. One mainstream historical fact, your family became known as the Royal Family of Europe. By the late 1800s, you were grandmother to no fewer than 42 royal grandchildren. You outlived some. You advised many. You kept up with most. Somehow. The irony, of course, is that you're both unifier and accidental arsonist. Because while your matchmaking stitched nations together in peaceful times, you can already feel the seams starting to tug. Wilhelm, your grandson, the future Kaiser of Germany, is sharp, proud, and a little too enamored with uniforms. Nicholas, your other grandson by marriage, the Tsar of Russia, is kind but indecisive. Both adore you. Both are poised to inherit storm clouds. and they are not friends. You try to soften them, letters, visits, the occasional family photograph where you place them side by side and hope proximity breeds peace. You know it probably won't, but you try anyway, because that's your role now. Not just queen, not just empress, but grandmother, the anchor at the center of a spinning web. You hold the family together with letters, with gifts, with gentle guilt trips disguised as compliments. When one child offends another, you're the go-between. When a marriage crumbles, you send comfort and subtle reminders about duty. Your love is firm, not flowery. You don't coddle, but you care. One fringe tidbit: you once scolded your daughter Vicky, the German empress, for letting her children read too much French literature. Their accents will suffer, you wrote, and I will not have this family sound like diplomats. You're still at heart the girl who grew up in Kensington Palace, trained in posture and German punctuality. But beneath all the etiquette, you're tired. Some days the letters blur. The names feel too long. You confuse Christian Nime with Franz Josef, and you once congratulated the wrong cousin on their engagement. He was 12. You rely more on your secretaries. You dictate more than you write. But your thoughts are as sharp as ever, especially when you see the signs, the whispers of revolt, the newspapers with headlines you don't understand, the hunger in places that still send you roses. You wonder if your family sees it, or if they're too wrapped in crests and carriages. You begin to prepare, not for war. You can't stop that if it comes, but for memory. You dictate your wishes, your values. You write instructions not for how to rule, but how to remember. You don't want to be canonized or romanticized. You just want them to know you tried to protect them, to guide them, to teach them the cost of being seen but not known. And that, perhaps, is what they will remember. Not just the crown, or the empire, or the Jubilee parades, but the woman who sat at her writing desk long after midnight, under candlelight, trying to keep a family of empires from coming undone, because you love them deeply, fiercely, quietly. And maybe that's the most powerful thing you ever did. It starts with a telegram. You're reading through petitions from somewhere in West Africa. Too many commas, not enough punctuation. When the footman clears his throat and hands you the thin slip of paper, you take it, skim it, and feel your stomach drop. There's unrest in the Balkans. Again, you sigh. Not because you're surprised, but because it's a Tuesday, and you were really hoping to make it to Wednesday without a geopolitical incident. The names are familiar now. Serbia, Austria, Russia, the alliances you helped construct, or at least politely nodded through, are cracking. Your grandsons are no longer adorable boys playing tag in palace gardens. They're monarchs, commanders, men with armies and egos and an unfortunate fondness for sabers. You remember when Wilhelm used to trail behind Albert like a shadow. Now he writes letters on military strategy and demands to be addressed as Supreme Warlord. You remember Nicholas as quiet, soft-voiced, always trailing behind his wife. Now he's the Tsar, and Russia's looking increasingly unstable. And there you are, sitting at your desk in Windsor, watching the great chessboard of Europe tilt. The irony is bitter. You've spent a lifetime stitching your bloodline across borders, believing that shared ancestry would soften conflict, that grandmothers and godparents could prevent guns. But war doesn't care about weddings. Historians still argue Whether your network of intermarriage delayed the inevitable or made the explosions worse when they came. What's certain is this: as you near the end of your reign, you can feel the storm brewing. You begin to write more. Letters to Nicholas, to Wilhelm, to ministers who still listen. You don't demand. You suggest. You remind them of dinners long ago, of promises made in youth, of mothers who wept during parades. You try to pull the past into the present and make it hold. It doesn't always work. Wilhelm replies with clipped lines. Nicholas sends warmer words, but his hands are clearly tied. You begin to see that the old way, the way of lace and letters, is losing ground to something more brutal, faster, less human. You read about machine guns in newspapers. You see photographs of trenches. You hear whispers of anarchists, of revolutions not just in Russia, but everywhere. One fringe tidbit? You're handed a phonograph recording once. Some scratchy voice announcing a new labor law. You can't believe a voice can be captured like that. You ask to play it again and again. Then you ask what happens when the wrong voice gets recorded. No one answers. You begin dreaming of Albert again, not just as a husband, but as a mind. He would have known what to do. He would have seen the fault line sooner. You sit by the fire and reread his old letters, his diagrams, his meticulous annotations on maps you no longer recognize. The world is speeding up, and your family, your children, your grandchildren are clutching at the reins with fingers not nearly strong enough. You think about abdications. You think about revolts. You think about how strange it is that the same blood can run through two kings who'd gladly fire on each other. You host a family gathering, one last effort to make unity feel real. They come reluctantly. The German cousins wear too much cologne. The Russian ones too much jewelry. The British contingent is stiff, polite, vaguely embarrassed. You sit at the head of the table, watch them toast, laugh, argue quietly in corners. And you realize this isn't a family anymore. It's a powder keg disguised as a Christmas card. Still, you smile. You raise your glass. You tell stories about when they were small, when the world felt simpler. You pretend, because that's what queens do. You don't fix everything, but you hold the line. And when they all leave with awkward bows and too firm handshakes, you sit quietly in the drawing room and whisper to yourself, God save them all. It's the most honest prayer you've spoken in years, because you know what's coming. Not the details, not the trenches and gas masks, not the treaties and body counts, but the weight of it, the unraveling. You've kept the empire together for 6 decades, but your grip is loosening. And for the first time in years, you're afraid, not for yourself, but for them, the ones who will inherit the world you leave behind. The hallway smells faintly of oil and metal, a whiff of modernity seeping in through ancient walls. You're led gently, slowly, into a small room tucked behind the greenhouse at Osborne House. A new device waits there. It clicks, it hums, it buzzes in a way that feels alive. You speak into this part, your attendant says nervously, pointing to the horn-shaped end of a contraption made of brass and mystery. Then we wind it. You squint, and it captures the voice? He nods. You lean forward, clear your throat, and say, I am Queen Victoria. Your voice wavers slightly. There's no script, no audience, just your words and a promise they'll somehow survive. Later, when you hear it played back, a soft ghostly echo of yourself, you feel a chill. That's you, alive in the box, preserved, unchanged, even as you wrinkle, slow, and fade. Welcome to the age of electricity. Technology is everywhere now. Your once candlelit halls now glow with gas and soon electric bulbs, Edison's strange little suns. Your letters arrive faster thanks to the telegraph. The clatter of carriage wheels has given way to the sputter of the automobile. You attend an exhibition and watch a light bulb shine without flame. You peer at an X-ray and see bones like ribbons. Someone lets you try a telephone, and for the first time, you hear a voice without a body attached. You blink and murmur, "Witchcraft." Your attendant doesn't correct you. You once ruled a world of handwritten notes and face-to-face diplomacy. Now, you sign off on railways, underground transport, transatlantic cables. Your empire doesn't just stretch across land now. It moves through wires, invisible threads of light and information. One mainstream historical fact: during your reign, London installed its first public sewer system, drastically improving public health. It was one of the most underrated revolutions of your time. No ballrooms, no parades, just fewer people dying of typhoid. You were pleased, you signed the acts. But you didn't frame the blueprints. What truly fascinated you were the machines. You watched the first motor car with suspicion. It growls, it smells, but it moves faster than horses, smoother than you expected. Your grandsons are obsessed with it. Bertie orders one in royal blue. You demand seat cushions that won't jostle your spine into oblivion. There's talk of flying machines now. Flying. Men building wings like birds, strapping engines to them, throwing themselves at the sky. Ridiculous, you say, right up until someone shows you a photograph of one hovering off the ground. You stare and realize you've lived long enough to see gravity challenged. One fringe tidbit: you're gifted a prototype electric bathing device. Basically a heated water system with more steam than safety. You try it once. The experience is scalding and oddly thrilling. You write in your journal, "Satisfactory but impractical." You then quietly insist on keeping it. The palace becomes a strange hybrid now. Chandeliers and light bulbs, gas lamps beside electric switches, typewriters clacking next to a gilded harpsichord. You marvel at it all, slightly offended that the world has the audacity to change so fast while you still wear the same black dresses. But change doesn't ask permission. It just arrives, and you adjust, sort of. You continue writing by hand, though your secretaries have typewriters now. You nod politely when shown graphs and data charts. You still prefer letters to telegrams. And when asked to pose for a photograph, you insist on holding still for much longer than necessary. Old habits, after all. Still, you embrace the useful inventions: padded chairs, gentle heaters, fans that hum instead of squeak. You thank the engineers silently as you sit comfortably through state meetings. Albert would have adored this age of steam and spark. You imagine him sketching engine designs and boring you half to sleep over dinner. You miss him in moments like this, moments where wonder becomes personal. Because more than war or politics, this is what stirs you now. The transformation of daily life, the comfort of warm water at the turn of a tap, the thrill of hearing your voice replayed in a room where no one else is speaking, the idea that someone, somewhere, could hear you long after you've gone. And yet, with every new marvel comes something quieter, nostalgia, for the world as it was, for the horses, the handwritten invitations, the slow and sacred weight of waiting. You don't resent the future, but you do mourn the past a little, its pace, its texture. Sometimes you walk the halls alone, touching the old walls, whispering to the shadows of your youth. You wonder what Albert would say about the phonograph. You wonder what your mother would have made of telegrams. You wonder if you've become history while still being alive. You sit at your writing desk and jot one more letter, to a cousin, to a child, to yourself. You seal it, set it aside, and listen to the wind against the windows. Outside, the world is electric. Inside, you're still candlelight, but both, somehow, still burn. You used to think of the empire in abstract terms, lines on maps, names in treaties, ships painted on canvas. But now, you can feel it. The world comes to you in swatches of cloth, spices that tickle your nose, and emissaries who speak in rhythms that make your English feel clumsy. You receive visitors from South Africa, Hong Kong, India, Australia, Canada. They bring gifts, bow low, rise slower. You nod, smile, sometimes speak, but mostly you listen. Because by now, you know that your empire isn't a list of possessions. It's a conversation, sometimes warm, sometimes strained. Sometimes it flows, and sometimes it breaks. You read dispatches from colonial governors, and while they praise progress, you notice what they omit. You ask questions. You press. You insist on details. You don't rule blindly, not anymore. Historically, your empire covered nearly 1/4 of the globe by the time you turned 80. The phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire," wasn't just poetry. It was geography. From the icy stretches of Canada to the coral-wrapped shores of the Caribbean, your face was printed on stamps in more languages than you could pronounce. You read about monsoons in Madras, rebellions in Sudan, famines in Bengal. Some days, you feel like your name is stamped across wounds, not wonders. Historians still argue whether the empire was a civilizing force or a colonial juggernaut. You don't have the luxury of clean answers. You only have letters, reports, lives. So you try to do better. You approve funding for schools, hospitals, railways. You promote native leaders when you can. You ask to hear directly from voices your advisors would rather filter. One fringe tidbit? You once received a pineapple from Jamaica so large it needed its own cushion. It was paraded through a drawing room and applauded like a guest. You never even tasted it, just admired it, as if the fruit itself had crossed oceans to say hello. Your curiosity grows, not fades. You learn phrases and languages no one expects you to know. You ask to see fabrics up close. You want to know how they're dyed, who wove them, what the patterns mean. Your servants raise eyebrows. "The Queen is taking an interest again," they whisper, not unkindly. You don't just sit on the throne now. You lean forward. Still, you don't travel. You remain on your aisles, surrounded by hedges, marble, and the smell of rain-soaked roses. But your mind walks distant roads. You imagine Cape Town, with its light bouncing off stone, Delhi, shimmering in heat, Sydney, smelling of salt and promise. You imagine these places not just as possessions, but as living, shifting lands, full of voices and dreams. And yet, you also sense the fractures. The calls for independence grow louder. The tension between loyal subject and occupied land sharpens. You're briefed on protests, publications, poems that hint at unrest. You feel it in the silences between official reports. And in those moments, you wonder, what will your legacy be? Not the parades or portraits, not the statues, but the stories. The way a girl in Calcutta speaks of Victoria Memsahib. The way a child in Johannesburg imagines the queen who lives in clouds. The way your name is both comfort and command. You try to hold that complexity because ruling people you'll never meet is strange. It's a kind of intimacy without closeness, a kind of responsibility without visibility. You continue writing, not declarations, reflections, quiet thoughts about the empire, about language, about the ways power flows and backwashes. You wonder if future queens will do better, if they'll listen more, if they'll ever see the corners you never reached. And on some days, you think maybe that's okay, because you did what you could with the time you had, in a world that changed faster than anyone expected. Your empire isn't just in the laws you signed or the statues they built. It's in the stories you touched, however lightly. And in those stories, you hope, quietly, fiercely, that some part of you will always walk beside them, not as ruler, but as witness. The windows are quiet now. No fanfare outside, no diplomats waiting in carriages, no footmen adjusting sashes or pages bustling in corridors. Just the ticking of a long case clock, echoing like a heartbeat in an old wooden chest. You're in Osborne House, the one you always preferred, modest, if such a word can be used for a royal residence. There's a fire, a dog sleeping nearby, a portrait of Albert where you left it. And your hands, they're thinner. Your rings spin more freely now. You wake later each day. You write shorter sentences. Sometimes you start a letter and forget whom it was meant for. But your mind still burns, especially at night, especially when the silence feels soft enough to listen to. You've stopped asking about Parliament. The ministers still send reports, still flatter you, still bow. But you can sense they're preparing for the next chapter, the next monarch, the next version of what it means to be British. You don't resent it. You're just tired. You've ruled for 63 years and 7 months, long enough that no one alive remembers the world before you. The gas lights came, then the electric ones. The horses gave way to trams, and now to motor cars. You've outlived your mother, your husband, most of your children. You've even outlived your own expectations. One mainstream historical fact: you died on January 22nd, 1901 at 6:30 p.m. with your son Bertie and your grandson Wilhelm, yes, that Wilhelm, at your bedside. You were 81 years old. They said your last words were about Albert. Even at the end, it was his name that lingered. But before that final breath, you asked for a few things. Your little dog to be brought in, Albert's dressing gown to be laid at the foot of the bed, a ring from John Brown's finger to be placed on yours. No trumpets, no final decree, just quiet. Historians still argue whether your reign was the golden age they paint it to be, or a long twilight casting shadows over people you never knew. Some say you stood too still. Others say you kept the world spinning by doing exactly that. You don't answer them, because now it's not about ruling. It's about releasing. You close your eyes, not with fear, but with memory. You see gardens, Albert's smile, the clumsy handwriting of your youngest daughter, the sound of Brown's boots on gravel, the hush of a ballroom just before the music starts. And then, stillness, not the kind that follows an argument or a paused performance, but the kind that feels earned, the kind that feels like rest. Your body quiets, the fire softens, the clock ticks once more and then fades behind the wind. And with that, the Victorian era ends, not with bells or bangs, but with a sigh, a candle gently flickering out. The sky outside is soft now. Not night yet, but not quite day either. Just that hush blue space where everything slows, where even time seems to tiptoe. You're still there in Osborne House, or maybe only a part of you. Maybe the rest is wandering through corridors of memory, across fog-laced meadows, between pages of old letters and warm footprints on palace floors. You've been so many things. A girl, quiet and sheltered. A queen, suddenly and unrelentingly. A mother, again and again. A widow, endlessly. An empress, gracefully. And always, always a witness. You saw the world split and mend, expand and contract. You watched lives bloom and fade, sometimes within a single season. You carried more names than most people carry dreams, and you let go of them gently, one by one. Now, there's only the breath, yours, softer than ever, the whisper of pages turning in a distant library, the faint sound of someone, somewhere, remembering your name. Not with grandeur, not with judgment, just with warmth. Because in the end, it wasn't the crown or the ceremonies that made your life remarkable. It was how you stayed, through grief, through change, through silence. And now it's time to rest. So pull the blanket higher. Let your thoughts soften. Let the night take over. You've ruled long enough. Sweet dreams, Majesty. End of script. Sweet dreams.